Thank you. So I'm Alina. I work over at the Halweil, and I want to say this is one of the most exciting conversations I've heard. This is great. And I think at the Halweil, one of the things we are very focused on right now is, of course, we're approaching the end of the mayor's term, and we're thinking about what we need to get done before that is over. And so I am curious for all of you, what are the most important things we need to do on food policy, either before this mayor leaves office, or to prepare as the new mayor comes in. Also, we would love to have you all over for this same conversation on the High Line, which was a structure created to bring food into the city. So let's put that out there.
Well, I mean, leading to this gaping point, I mean, what I find really, I'm sort of not going to answer your question, I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about something, but what I would say, and it really fascinates me, that maybe I should go into politics, actually. I mean, I am going to answer it in a way, I mean, but you've raised a very important point, which is the long-term thinking of you know, any government, whether it's a city government or a national government. And we've seen the same thing in London. Ken Livingstone, when he was mayor, you know, he brought in, he commissioned the London Food Strategy, brackets, there was no money to implement it, on brackets, but there you go. And, you know, the London mayor has even less power than the New York mayor, quite. Sorry, am I not sort of, I just used to people telling me my voice is too loud, so it makes quite a professional change. You know, and you know, there is this awful five-yearism, and of course food is something that never goes away. And I think, you know, for me, I mean, what's very exciting about what, you know, Alex has been saying is that, you know, there's a recognition, and it's not just in New York, obviously, but it is in cities where, you know, I think the kind of, you know, the food issue, shall we say, manifests itself in a particularly powerful way. So New York, obviously, you know, the threat to the watershed, or, you know, the degree of food waste, the fact there's nowhere to dump it, and we've all seen those pictures of the barges floating out, hopefully into the Atlantic. You know, so, you know, I think that the food thing has come up over the horizon, and once it's up over the horizon, it's never going back down again. So I think it's going to be increasingly important for food to be embedded, and for it not to be a kind of something that a mayor can on a whim decide not to deal with, and I think that's increasingly the case. So, I mean, for me, the commitment to treat food as the kind of the silo busting, common to all issue, and to make it embedded. I mean, a commitment to move towards something like a food council, you know, a policy council. And actually, as Tim said, I think New York's got an incredible opportunity to be first second in having a food policy council with teeth. There's actually elected, paid people who are in there to do a job, rather than well-meaning volunteers who just had a thing about, you know, bovine growth hormone 30 years ago and are still doing unpaid work. So, I mean, that's kind of utopian. I mean, but I would love to see that, a commitment to a really, you know, fully embedded, you know, elected and responsible and with power food policy council. Wow. That would be fantastic. Anyway, but no, the issue of you know, needing to get re-elected is a big one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so up on what, you know, I don't think in terms of, you know, what needs to get done in the remaining term, but having heard that, you know, 60% of the produce in New York City goes to Hunts Point, as well as most of the seafood, meat, dairy, and eggs, which is my understanding. I think that having some very ambitious plan for Hunts Point, which is still in limbo, would be a wonderful testament and legacy of the current administration, even if it's not implemented immediately. And again, thinking of that as the hub that can supply the expanded green carts, that can supply more school cafeterias, and thinking of that as the beginning of this new food chain. And it is worth noting that Portland, Oregon, which has a very well-established food policy council, set some interesting precedents in terms of farm-to-school programs, which are very successful in Portland. And then the person on that food policy council who started all those programs was recently appointed the czar of farm-to-school programs for the USDA, which is a whole new position. So much bigger stuff can grow out of food policy councils, even if they don't have real authority.
And there's a mayoral election campaign underway in Portland, and one of the candidates, I think Grady, is a foodie, and co-founded New Seasons grocery store out there, which is going to be a voice for local food. So there can be this longer-term political impact. So I was kind of wondering, to what degree could you imagine food becoming an important political issue here, and what would it take? Here, less about the city, more about how you could join together all the organizations and all the terrific energy that you have see today in some kind of a coalition that might even prepare a very provocative policy paper with talking points and some possible targets and aspirations for, and that then shapes the political dialogue food and elevates food among all the other competing things.
I think the challenge you face with that is the challenge that we faced, and the challenge that, when I asked what's the goal, and we got 3 different answers. We tried to do a coalition where some people are going to care about access. It's an environmental justice or a social equity issue. Other people are going to, maybe healthy food versus affordable food. Other people are going to be about organics. Other people are trying to figure out what is that. Some people are going to care about congestion. Some people are going to care about it from a small business standpoint. Some people are going to say we need to not just have our plan for Heinz Point, but we want to move away from trucks, where 98% of the freight in the city comes into trucks, and there are asthma issues related to that. We need to do rail issues, which then could increase the cost of food because the infrastructure need to go into that. So I think that's one of the challenges where, and I think what we've tried to do with Plan YC and kind of the ethos that the mayor brought to it is broadness and breadth of vision, the specificity of action. So we have 10 goals in the plan, broad long-term goals, 132 initiatives to try to achieve those goals, 404 milestones to be achieved by December 31st, 2013. We enacted a law with the City Council that requires us to detail our progress towards each of those milestones every year in an annual progress report. It just came out 2 weeks ago. It's on our website, including our progress on all the food initiatives that I mentioned. Annual greenhouse gas inventory that has to come out so you can track our progress. Set of 30 sustainability indicators, because we might be hitting every milestone, but have the absolute wrong initiatives to achieve our goals. So where are we on achieving those goals? So but it gets back to that data to see, are you going in the right direction? Can you galvanize that support? Can you keep up the efforts? Which isn't quite an answer, but I think it's trying to define what the issue or issues are, because it could be some people coming at it from a public health issue aspect, but getting candidates, getting people to hear about it when they're on the campaign trail, keeping the pressure up when they're in office, asking about it, and having it percolating through is a critical way to keep the sustainability effort. And that's a real issue facing sustainability efforts as we're maturing now from the kind of the new wave of sustainability, those first, second cities. It's 5, 7, 8 years of sustainability plans. How do you keep it through mayoral transitions? How do you keep it when that first sustainability director moves on? Keep that effort going, and I think it's a healthy question to have, because it means that there's a constituency that wants to keep it going.
We'll go over the
Adam mentioned FoodWorks, and I just want to just comment that that's been an incredibly progressive food policy platform that has had a lot of success. It's not a dusty document, that there's a lot of legislation that's gone through because of a pretty cohesive, multi-stakeholder effort to come up with some great food policy ideas. But besides that, back to the question of, and the city can play such a huge role, but there was a period of time where the federal government played a role in monitoring the food that was coming into the city through Heinz Point, at least around produce. And back in the 80s, you knew where everything was coming from, what percentage was from California, what was from New York State, and USDA cut that program off at the end of the 80s. And the question to the panel is, while cities play an enormous role and have the buying power and such policy leverage, what is the city-state-federal partnership here that drives so much of this work? We talked a lot about Heinz Point. The city can't do it alone in terms of the food infrastructure, so I'd like to hear what people have to say about that.
I had mentioned before this co-op that was formed by school districts on Long Island, 40 school districts, which represent a tremendous amount of buying power. discourage everyone, but it took 9 years to put that co-op together. There were federal barriers to it, there were local barriers to it, and I think a lot of the success happened in the last year or so because there's been some cultural change in terms of thinking, and all sorts of laws could quickly be changed, or regulations could quickly be changed that made it difficult to, give benefit, give an advantage to local sourcing and that sort of thing. But clearly you've identified a murky situation, and I think based on that experience, if the goals are clearly articulated, that this is about feeding our kids better, supporting local agriculture, encouraging food literacy among our school kids, then many people can get behind it.